ever since 2008, the 2008 financial crisis, governments and central banks have created a zombie economy. Real work has not been rewarded. The lower and middle classes that don't have the means to save in assets, therefore don't benefit from asset inflation, have been left behind. If you're under the age of 35, most likely you're significantly poorer than your parents were at the same age. People know that there's something inherently wrong with the system, but the tragedy is that they continue to seek a political solution. Unfortunately, whatever political party is in power, the issue remains the same. As long as there's a few bureaucratic elites that have the power and privilege to create money for free that everyone else has to work for, the incentives will never be aligned. Central bankers and politicians will continue to blame anything, everything, and anything but themselves, but they are the ones solely responsible for what's to come. Welcome to the Thriving During the Monetary Reset panel. All right, going to start with Mark Moss. Mark, the Federal Reserve was created to quote their own explanation off their website, provide the nation with a safer, more flexible, and more stable monetary and financial system. Do you believe it has failed that task, especially since the worst financial crises in American history, 1929 and 2008, have happened since the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913?
Well, as you read it directly off their website, to provide a more flexible, so certainly it's been flexible. Look at the way it stretches from one extreme to the other. Certainly more flexible. More stable? Certainly not. And so the problem is that we have a measuring stick, a yardstick that's made of a bungee cord or a rubber band. And so we don't have a good unit of account. And so a better way to do it is obviously gold has been money for 5,000 years and was money before the Federal Reserve created their dollar certificates out of thin air. And so if we take a look at using gold as a measurement and compare it to another asset like the Dow Jones, for example, and we can look at the Dow to gold ratio. And so using a non-manipulated unit of account like the dollar, we can see that the boom and bust cycle, or the ratio itself, only has gotten worse and worse and worse. So we've gone from getting to 20 to 1 to 50 to 1, and it just continues to get bigger like a megaphone. Imagine, if you will, if you were carrying like two books in your hand, how easy that'd be to carry 2 books. But as the monetary system gets bigger, if I had 1,000 books in my hand, how unstable that gets. And so it swings wildly from one side to another. You know, the other thing that I would say is that, as Ludwig von Mises would say in the crack-up boom, and then suddenly people realize that inflation is both permanent and intentional. And so if you think about a point that Nico wanted me to make, is that in the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx wrote 10 points to establish a communist society. Point number 5 was the creation of a central bank. And so it was intentionally made this way to be flexible to, yes, they are flexible, certainly not stable.
Absolutely. It's central banking doing what central banking always does. Dr. Jeff Ross, question to you. Let's define what a monetary reset is. Why does it happen? And what do you think Bitcoin's role will be in it?
So that's a great question. Monetary resets don't happen very often. When they do, they're pretty notable. The couple significant ones happened in the 1900s, as people know. So following World War II, there was a great monetary reset. The US dollar was decided to be basically the king asset, the world reserve currency. It was backed by gold. It was on a gold standard based on American dollars. Fast forward to 1971, the US was embroiled in a very unpopular war called the Vietnam War. They couldn't afford it. As most people know, they were rapidly depleting their gold supplies because other nations around the world didn't want dollars because they saw the United States borrowing tremendous amounts of money to pay for this war. They wanted gold. The US, Nixon got to the point where he said, you know what? Hey, tell you what, instead of giving you gold, we're not going to do that. We're just going to take the dollar off of a gold standard. We're going to take it off of a unit of account, off of an honest unit of accounting, and we're just going to call it fiat. Why will it have value? Well, by decree, it will have value. That's what fiat means. So by decree, the government said the US dollar now has value. You can't get any gold for it. The other nations in the world decided to follow along. That was a massive monetary reset. That leads us to where we are today. We're in the final stages of this Keynesian economic experiment, Credit expansion is the rule of the game. Debt is everywhere. Nations have massive amounts of unpayable debt. That's where we are today. When we see that happen, what happens? The economic engine of the world slows down and people start getting desperate. We're seeing cracks in the foundation. We're seeing massive volatility. We're seeing inflation pick up significantly, and in many nations we're seeing hyperinflation. When that happens, things get crazy. Thank God for Bitcoin. Bitcoin came around, as you all know, in 2009. This is the beginning of the next monetary reset. I will just say, and I'll stop here, but monetary resets are generally ugly. They generally come around ugly times. You'll notice that the last two that I talked about were both during periods of war, either after war or during a war. We see tremendous geopolitical upheaval during these times, and so that's what is going to birth the next generation, the next great monetary regime, which I believe is Bitcoin, but we can talk about that.
You know, for being called Dr. Ross, that made me Dr. Bear. That made me incredibly bullish, man. Okay, so Louis, to add to what Dr. Ross was saying, right? Clearly, governments benefit tremendously, whether they want to pay for wars or they want to fund war, having this monopoly on the issuance of money, right? They kind of use it as their slush fund. Clearly, that party, they see that party's starting to end. And in response to that, I believe central bank digital currencies were created for this reason. Go ahead.
So yeah, so what government is trying to do after the Great Monetary Reset is they wanted to reset it with their own version of the digital currency that is copying Bitcoin, but is the opposite of the Bitcoin. Is the centralized version of a digital asset, and they want to use that as a a new monetary system to control the monetary policy of the world. So CBDC has been a very favorable subject for government to research on, and I think this is a very difficult and a problematic situation that we are in, because we are facing one way is totalitarian centralized control of our monetary system, and Bitcoin as an alternative, a more free and decentralized monetary system that we can have. But the choice is in our own hand. Do we want government control of our monetary policy, or we want control of our own monetary policy, which is Bitcoin?
Absolutely. Mark, for you. The governments worldwide continue to seek alternatives to the US dollar. Do you believe this trend will continue? Is de-dollarization inevitable? If so, what are the consequences to the US economy, and how can individuals protect themselves?
Well, certainly de-dollarization is happening. It's been happening for a long time. We know Russia, China, they've been de-dollarizing, and we can see it just looking at the global FX reserve. So from 1999 to the year 2021, the global FX reserve share of the US dollar fell from 71 to 59%. It's a pretty big drop in a short period of time. That only goes through 2021. I don't have updated numbers to 2022, but I would imagine it's a big hit after what happened with Russia. So you look at the trucker protest, and very quickly, not only the Canadians, but the rest of the world found out that the money in the bank wasn't their money, and the government could freeze that money anytime they wanted. And that was bad. That was a big wake-up call. But then we had Russia, where all of a sudden now we have one of 3 global superpowers with nuclear weapons got their bank accounts frozen and seized. And so I would imagine the de-dollarization has only accelerated from that point. We're probably somewhere in about the 50% range, and it's dwindling very quickly. Of course, we have the rise of the BRICS nations, which now account for more than half of the people in the world. They're trying to form their own financial system, including their own gold system, et cetera, compared to the LBMA. I think ultimately what we're seeing with FTX happening today, they created an FTT token out of thin air. People wanted it until they didn't, until CZ was going to sell it, and then everybody rushed for the exit. FTX was forced trying to sell any asset they could to prop up the FTT token, but it didn't matter, nobody wanted it. Now take that example and look at Japan. Japan can create as many yen out of thin air, but nobody wants it. They're selling the yen short, and now they're stuck trying to sell anything they can, mostly US treasuries, to prop up the yen. It's the exact same thing. And now we can take it and look at the Bank of England, same thing, ECB, same thing, and even the Federal Reserve is the same thing. Whenever you buy something other than holding dollars, you're selling the dollar short, You're selling a worthless token short. And so we'll continue to see the world continue to de-dollarize, in my opinion, and we're seeing it at a rapid rate, faster than we've seen in any time since the dollar's been the reserve standard, and I think it will only continue.
Absolutely. Okay, Dr. Jeff Ross. Bitcoin was supposed to be an inflation hedge. What happened?
I love this question. So I like to tell people there are two types of inflation, and the news media gets this wrong all the time, right? There's price inflation, and there's monetary inflation. Now, those are related over the long run, but in the short run, they really have nothing to do with each other. For investors in stocks, you can think of it like stocks. They, over the long run, trade towards their book value, right? But in the short term, they can be much more expensive. They can be much cheaper. That's the same thing that happens, okay? So Bitcoin is made for, it's literally a solution to monetary inflation. So as governments continue to create credit, as they expand the monetary supply, Bitcoin is custom built for that. Why is it custom built for that? First of all, fiat currencies, as they're created, they literally can be created infinitely. Neil Kashkari is famous for saying that. We can literally create an infinite amount of dollars. As you create an infinite amount of something, the value of each individual unit approaches zero mathematically. To Greg Foss's point, if he's in here, it's just math, people. Use your heads. Bitcoin is the exact opposite, right? Perfectly scarce, 21 million units of Bitcoin, 21 million Bitcoin ever will be created. Because of that, the value of each individual Bitcoin approaches infinity over time. So it's custom made for monetary debasement. In the short run, we're going to see periods where Bitcoin gets pulled down, right? Especially while we're in this current price discovery phase of Bitcoin. It's going to act very volatile, and this is going to continue, I believe, for many years, possibly a couple of decades, until it reaches more of its full potential. I don't even think it gets to be a little bit stable until it reaches gold's market capitalization of about 10 trillion. It will go far beyond that, but that's just sort of the first marker point where institutions start to believe this is a legitimate store of value, and they start piling in much more. So where am I going with this? Over the long run, think of these two things. Price inflation, monetary inflation, they'll converge over the long run, which means the longer you save in US dollars, the more expensive life gets, right? We all know that. The longer you save in Bitcoin, the cheaper life gets, the better life gets. We're going to have a disinflationary world when we're on a Bitcoin standard. We're just not there yet. But that's a good thing for those of us who are early, because as we get there and get to that point, we're going to really enjoy the ride, and it's going to be quite the ride.
Absolutely. What's the famous equation? 21 million divided by infinity. I think that perfectly summarizes it. Louis, many believe that in 2023, the world's economy is headed into a recession. Do you believe this will increase the rate of Bitcoin adoption? And will BTC be an effective tool in mitigating the risk for individuals and corporations in this environment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think Bitcoin right now trades just like any other risk-on asset. And to be frankly and to be truthful here is that during the recession time, risk-on asset will not be in the favor of investors' portfolio. But what it can do is you can treat it like an insurance, because the U.S. debt system cannot be sustained without monetary inflation. So Bitcoin is insurance for that situation to happen, and I do think government has no choice to monetize their debt to achieve economy growth and achieve the stability of the financial system. So I think Bitcoin, if you wanted to see that in your portfolio, you treat it like an insurance. You treat it like this is something that might happen to the traditional world, and you need that Bitcoin to survive.
Mark, do you wanna add to that? Here, I got you, man. Don't worry. What I asked Louis was, do you believe that Bitcoin can be an effective tool for individuals mitigating the risk from a potential recession in 2023?
I think where Dr. Jeff left off, and he talked about time frames, and so understanding time frames, and I think realistically, I think you need to look at Bitcoin over at least a 5-year period. I started my career in real estate. I was developing from the ground up. Those were 5-year projects. We've heard Michael Saylor talk about it in 10-year time frames. And so really thinking about it in long-term time frames. I mean, you're asking about over the next year. We know clearly that the macro picture is in the driver's seat. and we don't know exactly what's going to happen. We believe that we can see what the constraints the central banks have in front of them, and so even though Jerome Powell says that he's committed to sticking with it until the job is done and so forth, now they're not even, they'd rather break it and rebuild it. We know there's constraints that they're going to run up against. If I have to guess, I'm thinking they hit those constraints sometime in the next 6 to 9 months, and they're forced to kind of pivot and start blowing things back up again. I would guess that by the end of 2023, we're probably higher than where we are today. So to answer your question, if I'm guessing, yes, I would say that it's probably it will probably do a pretty good job of keeping up with inflation through the end of 2023 and beyond. Once we get through whatever pain we're going to get through with the Fed, it could stretch out to be longer, but if I'm guessing, I'm thinking my base case says it probably is higher by the end of 2023.
This panel's making me bullish, man. Dr. Ross, if the Fed is not able to rein in inflation over an extended period of time, and we see greater loss of confidence in the US dollar, is hyperinflation possible, and what is Bitcoin's role in that environment?
I would say hyperinflation is actually inevitable for all fiat currencies, and what that means is as it's dying, you see hyperinflation as the final phase, and then it goes to zero. Why does it go to zero? Because the citizens have lost confidence in that currency. So will it happen? Absolutely. The problem is the US dollar still remains the strongest currency by far, I think, in the world. It's going to be the last to fall. So I think we're still talking years and years and years down the road where we would even see this in the US dollar personally. I do think this decade, though, we're going to see lots of emerging market economies and their currencies, they are going to fold. And I think that purchasing power is going to be looking for a home in either the US dollar or, to Mark's point, the BRIC nations with their own monetary system. And the dark horse coming up fast is Bitcoin. So we're going to see lots more purchasing power merge into one of those three currencies, I believe, by the year 2030. So it's going to be an interesting time.
And if I was just going to add on to that, I would just say that I would also agree with that. I mean, basically all the governments, so we said there's natural constraints. And so if you look at each government, specifically look at the United States or any of these other major G7 nations, no nation, I mean, each nation is going to be faced with two options. Go bust, default, go bankrupt, or print money. Those are the two options. And which are they going to choose? Of course, they're always going to choose to print, right? That's always going to be the option. So I think people need to keep in mind there's two types of busts. There's a deflationary bust, where everything drops in value so fast, your retirement accounts drop, your home prices drop, that you're broke. But there's also an inflationary bust, where you become a millionaire or a billionaire, but yet you still can't buy anything. In Zimbabwe, everybody became a billionaire, but it was $350 billion for one single egg. And so I think that's probably the bigger problem. I think right now we're seeing our retirement accounts, we're seeing our home portfolios dropping, and everyone's like, please, Fed, when will you pivot? When will you pump assets back up? But I believe the bigger problem that we're going to have, careful what you wish for, you'll get it, is that asset prices will start going up so fast, how will you get long enough? How will you be long enough to keep your head above that rising tide? I think Bitcoin will probably be the best option for that.
100%.
Yeah, so I'll add on to the mark. So, you know, we can't even predict the future, right? When is the Fed going to pivot? We are only all speculate on this subject. But what if I'm certain is Bitcoin has a fundamental value that has a characteristic that has to be owned or in the portfolio. So, you know, not thinking about 2023 or 2024, I think Bitcoin sit at a very important role in the portfolio management allocation. We should think like 5 years ahead and 10 years ahead, because government's going to monetize that, and they're going to go with printing more money. So you got to be prepared with holding some Bitcoin in your portfolio.
So Louis, to add to your point, does the Fed need to pivot for Bitcoin to recover, especially since we're only a year from the Bitcoin halving, and that has historically led to massive volatility to the upside?
So I have to be honest, like Bitcoin price is very correlated with the interest rate, because that's what we saw right now and in the market price, right, of the Bitcoin. Because Federal Reserve is pulling money out of the system, and that's why Bitcoin dropped in price. So for Bitcoin price to go back to the previous level, I think we have to get into the situation where central bank has to do something about the interest rate, about their monetary policy. They have to increase the monetary inflation again for Bitcoin to start be an interesting asset and something that can come up this recession and the market drawdown faster than other assets.
So Mark, throughout the last 100 years, governments have used kinetic war as a distraction to monetary resets. In the age of social media, is that even a possibility now that individuals are able to circumvent the gatekeepers of information?
Oh, it's certainly possible. It's certainly being done as we speak right now, which is, of course, certainly why they want to restrict those. We've seen Jacinda Ardern from the PM of New Zealand went to the UN a month ago and said we need global cooperation and censorship. She called free speech weapons of mass destruction. And so they understand that if they can't control the narrative, then they won't be able to control the situation at hand. And so if you look back through warfare, as far back in history as you want to look, it's always been some sort of propaganda that they've used. And so they need to not only close off the exits on the monetary system, not allowing you to escape, they also need to kind of close off the exits on the information highway. And so certainly, right, Elon Musk was every liberal's favorite, and now he wants free speech, and now they hate him. And so you have to understand kind of why that is, why they're calling for the end of free speech and so forth. The problem is that nowadays information just moves too fast. So they want to say, oh, there's this uprising going on in this country in Africa, and people are on Twitter saying, well, I'm here right now, and it's not actually happening. And so we're able to call them out, we're able to see it, we're able to share information faster. And I really believe, you talk about the kinetic war, I think really it's more of a war over information, and it's a war over money. It's a financial war, right? We can see that happening with the war, really the tariff wars that Trump started probably with China, and it's only escalating now. So it's an economic war. We have Bitcoin. It's an information war. We got social media and we got memes. So I feel pretty good about it.
So question to Dr. Ross. It's clear, based on what you guys are saying, individuals are going to continue to opt out, follow their incentives, opting out to Bitcoin. Obviously, losers there are governments, right? They want to be able to maintain that privilege. What do you believe? What malicious attacks do you believe we'll see from governments? Do you believe that they are malicious, or do you believe that perhaps they're not informed?
Well, I think backing up a little bit, what is the plan of governments? How do they get out of these insurmountable, unpayable debts? They do financial repression, right? So we have this unpayable debt burden right now. What do? You let inflation run hot, you keep interest rates low, and you pay off that debt on the backs of the purchasing power of the citizens. Meaning, if you have $1 and the government is doing this little trick where they let inflation run hot while keeping interest rates low, lower than inflation, you're literally just losing your purchasing power so that the government can survive. Is this malicious? Of course it is. It's terrible. Governments should not be doing this to their people, but the last time they did this, right, it was post-World War II. Gold ownership was literally illegal, and Bitcoin didn't exist. This time around, we have options. We have a way to opt out of financial repression. You can buy Bitcoin. You can opt out of that tyranny, opt out of the madness and the clown world. And this crypto garbage, the FTX situation is a perfect example of this. Crypto is just more of the same world technology, while Bitcoin has changed the world technology. So I would say opt out of these malicious tactics that our governments are doing towards us and just opt into Bitcoin. It's literally that easy. You're defunding the politicians who are doing this to you.
Absolutely. Oof. He should change his name from Dr. Bear to Dr. Bull. Louis, we got about a minute left.
Sure.
Look, it's been obvious that governments have been able to successfully manipulate the price of gold. Do you think that Bitcoin will suffer the same fate?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. I think we're still in the early stage of the Bitcoin adoption. And I do think government in the future is going to, like El Salvador, right? They are going to buy Bitcoin in their treasury. So would that manipulate the Bitcoin price? To be honest, I don't know. But I do think government is going to come in with the printed money to buy Bitcoin because this is the only bear asset that's out there, which is better than gold. They will own some, and but will they manipulate it, or can this market be manipulated? Honestly, I have no answers to that.
Got you. Ladies and gentlemen, this was Thriving during the monetary reset. Shout out Mark Moss, Dr. Jeff Ross, and Louis Liu. I'm Nico Moran. Thank you so much, everybody.